Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of these two guys right here, which are both examples of the Serge watches Model 1. Now, first off, though, in the name of full disclosure, I gotta let you know that these guys were provided to me directly as a loaner by Serge Panchenko. These were loaned my way. I'll be sending them along to another reviewer after this one, but Serge, passed them along. As always, I sent him my disclaimer. I told him I'm gonna talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. Might be a gem, might be junk. He still did send it along, but we do have to assume that these are the very best quality controlled prototypes ever, and these are, by the way, prototypes. These are in fact the same watches featured on his channel, or I'm sorry, on his Instagram and whatnot. But nonetheless, that's what we've got there, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature and quality of my review. Next thing, let's do a size comparison. These guys, and actually I'll just use the brass one here. These guys are not small, although actually they're not huge either. We'll go in millimeter mode because we're in watch country. We're looking at a 43 millimeter overall size, but more importantly, and maybe more impressively, the lug-to-lug distance on these is only 46 millimeters, and this ends up being actually much more reasonable than a lot of your choices in the watch world these days. We have a thickness here of 13.1, someplace in there. And so they are not super skinny, but at the same time, yeah. And then the overall band width here on the side, this is a 22 millimeter band. 22 millimeter bands fit just fine, including aftermarket ones like this one that I tried there from Barton Bands. So anyways, there is your size measurement. The next thing I want to highlight real quick is actually a little less conventional, but it is going to play a major role in my review, and that is a weight comparison, basically weight measurements. We'll do this first off in ounces here because that's how a lot of folks think. It's 7.1 ounces, or if I didn't mean to tear it, I meant to change the units. Let's do grams. We are coming in here at about 200 grams on the bracelet, and the head of this guy itself is about 100 grams. That is a heavy freaking watch. This is a beastly sort of thing, and that is, by the way, the weight for the brass version. I'm trying to remember if the steel version is any different. So this is 201 grams here. The steel is 199. So it hardly makes any difference here between the two. I'm sorry, that's bronze, not brass, but whatever. So we got those guys there. Next thing, there are one thing to highlight here is actually the maker of this is Serge Panchenko. Serge Panchenko is a name that most folks in the watch world won't have heard of, but maybe in the knife world is going to be very common, right? Serge is a well-known designer. This is the guy who designed the Spyderco Serge Panchenko dog tag folder. He also did the Orbit, I believe, with the Hawks. He did the Spyderco Rock. He's a very well-known production knife maker, as well as the Boca Lancer. He's done a bunch of collaborations with production companies, as well as a very successful custom line. He also does things like this. This is a slip joint knife that he's done recently, that I'll be reviewing here shortly on the channel. But Serge is a well-known voice sort of in the knife design world, but this is his very first watch. This is his Model 1. And so I was excited to take a look at that. Then finally, actually not quite finally, these are prototypes, as I mentioned already. The final production version, I gather, will be very similar to these, and Serge didn't have any, specific, we're changing X, Y, and Z things. But there you go. And then finally, there were 5 different colorways for this guy. There are 2 versions of them that look like this, that are steel on steel. I'm sorry, there are 3 versions. The version 1, 3, and 5 are steel on steel, steel bezel, steel case, with either red accents, like this guy, orange accents, or a full-on orange dial. And those go for $400. And then there are 2 versions that have the bronze on the steel, where it's either got a red or an orange accent sort of thing. And so those are the different choices there. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, the ugly of this very interesting little pair of watches here. So on the good side to start with, I mentioned that the size is actually quite reasonable, but it is. This is a watch that's going to be wearable for a variety of wrists. Especially that lug-to-lug distance really makes this a lot more, frankly, feasible than a lot of your sort of larger pieces. This is a Grand Seiko here, and we can see here that the lug-to-lug is much, much longer, making this look like a dinner plate, or making this look like a dinner plate on my wrist, whereas this actually feels like a pretty good fit. So I think he's done a good thing in terms of making it wearable for many people, at least in the size dimension. Next thing, the bracelet on this guy is actually a little bit better than I expected for the price, because we are using screw-down links here. Although it looks like these are like cotter pin style split links. In reality, these are screws. And so you can just get a little tiny screwdriver in there and then unscrew them. And that's great. That makes for very easy adjustability. It's absolutely a beautiful thing. One other thing to highlight on the bracelet, although actually it's more on the watch case, is this right here. These are drilled lugs, which means that to pop the bracelet out, all you have to do is take a watch spring bar tool like this one here, and then just insert it in here, and then it'll pop out. And that's a great thing. It's a little detail, but it's one that I very much appreciate and like to see on watches. So that's good. Next thing, you'll see here that the entirety of the watch, we can look at the stainless one here. Well, they're both stainless, but still, the entirety of the watch is stone-washed. And you know what? This does a couple of things for you. It means that scratches don't really matter, right? You know, you'll see them, but they won't be a major concern. It'll kind of add to the patina over time. But more importantly, and it means there's nothing really reflective here aside from the crystal itself, but more importantly, it is very much in line with the Serge aesthetic, right? I mean, if we look at this next to one of his his knives, yeah, that about tracks, right? And so that's definitely something that I think a lot of people are going to like, and it's an unconventional choice in the watch world. Generally speaking, watches are brushed or high polished, whereas this guy is tumbled, and that's kind of unusual. Next thing, these guys are very legible. You look down at this guy, you can read the time no matter what. And by the way, sorry about the time difference. Enjoy. But anyways, they are super legible because you've got lume on the hours, minutes, and second hand. In fact, I can show that lume off right quick here. On this guy, charging it off screen with a flashlight, we can see here there is lume on the hours, minutes, and second hand, and so that's a great thing. But you know that makes this just legible pretty much any time, so that's good. Next thing, the movement in these guys. This is where you would be able to see the movement if it had a clear case back. But this is a Miyota movement, which is a Japanese movement, and it's the 9039. This is a hacking movement. What I mean by that is that when I unscrew the crown here and pull it out, you're going to see that the movement stops. And this allows me to very easily synchronize the watch with, for instance, and the second hand stops altogether as well, but allows me to very easily synchronize the watch with, say, the other watch on the table here, making so many people feel just that much better about the world. Yeah, you're welcome. But that's good. It is a hand-winding movement, which means, and it's also an automatic, by the way. It has a weight in there that will charge itself over time, but it also allows you to charge the watch, so to speak, well, to add some more power to the power reserve of the watch by turning the crown itself. So if you, even if you're not wearing it, you just unscrew the crown, and then you can wind it a little bit, and that'll work there. It has a 42-hour power reserve, meaning this will stop after it's been off your wrist for about 42 hours. That's pretty common for a mechanical watch, and so that's good. And this is, by the way, a mechanical watch. It's not a quartz watch. You're seeing a consistent 4 hertz, 4 times a second, that is, ticking along rather than the tick, tick, tick every second there. In terms of accuracy, both of these prototypes were actually running accurately. Putting them on the time grapher, I was seeing, no worse than, I think one of them was, depending on the position, like plus 0 point some odd all the way up to -9. The other one, I think, was +7 to -3. Either way, they were at a fine range for this price point. So honestly, the movement is good. It's a well-known movement. It's a good workhorse, and it is a very solid sort of piece in that way. So horologically speaking, I think it's pretty much on point. By the way, the dial texture on this guy is kind of nice as well. Next thing, this is a 200-meter water-resistant watch. It says that on the back of here, although hopefully we'll be able to see it. It's stone-washed, so it's a little tricky to focus in on that, but nonetheless, it is a 200-meter water-resistant watch. There it is, 20 atmospheres. Which basically means you don't have to worry about water with this guy, and it has a screw-down crown, which makes that easier. It has a sapphire crystal with an internal anti-reflective coating, and one thing that's worth noting, and it doesn't necessarily show up in the pictures that have been out there, is that the crystal sticks up just a little bit above the bezel. We'll talk about that later on, but you can definitely see a little bit of that crystal there, and that can add something or take something away, depending on the way you want to look at it, but it's good that it's sapphire rather than mineral crystal, which is very commonly still found among brands like Seiko in this kind of a price range. Again, the $400 to $500 range. And actually, speaking of that, the price on these guys is quite good. When I heard that Serge was making watches, my first thought was, oh, that's going to be pricey. But actually, no, he came at these at a very, very good price point. At $400 to $450. So again, $400, $450 with the bronze, is putting these in a range where they're very competitive with a lot of what's out there already, right? You are up against some of the good stuff from Seiko, like you're up against the Samurais, that kind of thing. But again, they have have similar movements. They have similar, although in this case, we've got some upgrades in terms of the water resistance, etc. So I feel like $400 is a price range where these are very easily competitive with what's available, and you're getting a design that I think is going to be interesting to a lot of folks. So I find the prices to be good. Then finally on the great, or on the bad, good Lord, guys, there were 4 categories, and I just chose 2 of them wrong. Not good. But anyways, finally on the good side, these here are screws. They appear to be Allen key style screws. I don't even know what size they are, but they are screws that just come right out. And the reason that that's important, the reason that that's interesting, and the reason that I think that's kind of cool is that once you, no, not quite there, but anyways, once you take those out, you can pop this bezel out. The water resistance of this watch is not based at all on the bezel. This bezel here is completely unrelated to the water resist. The crystal is into the case there. Instead, these are swappable, which means that you can put any material you'd like in there that is shaped like this bezel into that in the future. Did somebody say Timascus? Because I sure did. I mean, seriously, there are so many cool materials that are available in the knife-making world. For instance, zirconium, Timascus, all of these various, even a high-polished and anodized titanium could look amazing in there. And the fact that you can take this bezel off just using a conventional screwdriver and swap it in for something else could actually kind of herald in an era of just like make your watch look like whatever you want your watch to look like today. It's a great thing. And I think it really plays to Serge's strengths, knowing the material market in the knife world, that you can swap those in too. So I very much hope that not only are these watches well available, but they are available with a variety of aftermarket bezels that you can pick up, ideally from Serge, but who knows from where. Pardon me, that you are very, very easily able to swap out in the future to make your watch a little bit more custom than it would have otherwise been. So that, to me, is what's good, is that it's got the swappable bezels, good prices. It's got sapphire water resistance that's absolutely great. It has a good, solid workhorse movement. It has good legibility, a full stonewash, a nice bracelet, and a very nice size. The great side of this guy is actually going to be that design. This is a Serge Panchenko design. You take one look at this and you're like, yeah, that's Serge. In fact, there is a surge of surgitude going on right up in this guy. This is a Serge design. And that's a great thing, I think, for a lot of people. There is a reason that Serge is a much beloved designer in the knife world, and I think this carries it over well. I was a little worried when I heard he was going the watch route, like, oh, is he just going to do something super generic, and it's just going to be like, yeah, I put my logo on it. No, this is a Serge. There is zero question here. This is like one of those babies that basically looks like the father, but small, where you take one look, you're like, huh, no paternity test needed here. And so Serge has a very popular aesthetic, and this is exactly in his world, in his wheelhouse. And although I think that there are probably going to be fewer watch people who are going, oh my God, I need one of these, in the knife community, there are going to be a lot of folks. Frankly, this is going to get a lot of people into watches. And that itself is kind of an interesting ethical quandary. But the simple fact is, this is a Serge design through and through. His designs are popular in the knife world, so I think this is going to end up being a very popular design. So to me, that's what's great, is that this is uniquely his design language, and I love it. Not necessarily... I love the fact that it is his, unique design language. On the bad side, the design here is going to be very polarizing as well. I posted pictures of this on it. Well, actually, frankly, the best example of this is I brought this downstairs. I put this guy on my wrist, brought it downstairs, said to my wife, as I generally do with any new product, hey, what do you think of this? And her first words were, please tell me you didn't buy that, which is strong. Yet, that said, to contrast this, when I posted this guy on Instagram, half the damn people were saying, I'm not a watch guy, but oh my God, I want that watch. So I think that this is going to have a very strong appeal, but it's also going to have a very strong not appeal to a lot of folks out there. And I think that this is going to appeal more to the battle-worn aesthetic crowd than the folks who are after sort of your more conventional, for instance, this is a Grand Seiko GMT, after your more conventional high-polished jewelry-style pieces. This is going to appeal to that, and I think it's really going to land well in the knife crowd, even, like I said, if I don't know that it's going to land as well in the watch world. But maybe it will. Who knows? Next thing on the bad side, this is a pre-order piece. These are prototypes. That's definitely something you want to keep in mind. Serge has been around in the community long enough that I'm not particularly worried, but it is still something you want to keep in mind. There is always a little bit of risk involved with those kinds of things, and I would be remiss if I didn't highlight that that's the kind of thing we're looking at here. Next thing, on the idealistic side, this could use half links. What I mean by that are links that are half the length of these. That would just make it a lot easier to get this guy fitted exactly to your wrist properly. And more importantly, at least for me, it would allow you a little bit more flexibility to use these holes to deal with natural and, expansions, contractions of your wrist. I would also like to see a toolless style quick adjust, where you're able to just like press a button and move the bracelet in and out to give yourself a little bit of extra ease in dealing with wrist swelling and things like that. But there's definitely that. But anyways, perfect fit is a little bit hard when you have these relatively long links, and that's the only amount of adjustment you're able to do. Save these guys down here. Next thing, the loom on the hours is a little bit weak on these guys. It's not terrible, and it will reliably get through the night, but there comes a certain point where you can see that the hour hand, you can see already. It's maybe not as visible on the camera, but the hours away, the indices, that is, here, not the hour hand. The hour hand is fine, but the hours disappear much quicker than the hands themselves. Again, it should make it through the night if you charge it right before bed, but I'd like to see those done a little stronger in the future. Next thing, this has no date feature. There is no little hole on the watch that tells you what day it is, namely the 30th at the moment. And that's, not something that's going to be great for some people. Although I got to say, aesthetically speaking, it works out pretty well. It's a pretty minimalist piece, and unless he put it in kind of a weird, I don't know where it would go in there, but that can be a deal breaker for some. The other thing that's interesting about this guy, and is an interesting design choice, is that this guy does not have a, there were no indices for the minutes. Like, there's no sub-marking between, for instance, 30 and 35 here. Whereas on a lot of watches, you'll get those little individual ticks there showing you exactly where you're going. And by the way, this is unfair. By the way, these comparisons, this is like a $5,000 watch. This is a $500 watch. Slight difference. But anyways, this doesn't have those little minute indices there, and that's something to keep in mind. And then finally on the bad side, as I mentioned, this bezel here, which is removable and replaceable, is not actually, it doesn't fully contain this crystal. The crystal, which does have a little bit of an angle on there, and that's not unattractive, sticks up above the bezel. One of the purposes of a bezel like this is actually to help protect the crystal from like a glancing blow. You're walking through a door and you clip the top of your watch here, it's going to be much easier for something to hit that crystal if that bezel is lower. So it might be something, I don't know, I would sort of almost like to have seen the bezel come up to the same level as the crystal or go a little tiny bit higher, just to protect that a little bit more, especially if you're going for the overbuilt tool watch sort of aesthetic. That might have made a little bit more sense to me, and, might have made the bezel a little bit, more prominent, which again, if you're doing fancy materials and such, that's luckily something that can probably be done aftermarket, right? If he's selling new bezels, he can make an extra large bezel with extra protection, but still, that was a little bit weird. Like, you've got this big, strong bezel on here, but it's below the crystal. Strange. But anyways, to me, all of that is the bad, is that the bezel is below the crystal. There is no minutes legend here. There is no date function. The lumen, the hour indices is a little weak. Could use some half links and a toolless quick adjust, but $400, okay, whatever. It is a pre-order, and the design is definitely going to be polarizing. On the ugly front, there is just one ugly issue here, and that is the weight. These guys are very, very heavy. In fact, we've heard, look, in the everyday carry community, we talk a lot about weird uses of self-defense. People talk about, oh, I have a self-defense knife. Like, okay, running shoes are a better idea, but whatever. Oh, this pen is overbuilt. It's a self-defense pen. Really? Well, this is a self-defense watch, in that it is heavy enough that if you throw this at an attacker, you're probably going to do some real damage to him. Now, look, I kind of get it, because it's got this big, thick, bricky steel case, and in fact, if we look at it, we see all of these areas are just solid chunks of steel here. There is a lot of steel involved. So it makes sense that this is heavy, but ooh, it's heavy. And more importantly, especially if you put it on the bracelet, oh man, even adjusted to my wrist, this was just like, wow, I'm working that left arm today. Damn. It's arm day every day with this guy. But more importantly, it's heavy and it's relatively small. I think there are lots of folks out there in the world who don't mind a big boat anchory style watch. But those may also be the same folks who prefer a big watch. If you got big arms, then maybe the weight's not going to bug you as much, but this is going to be a little bit smaller, and so as a result, these guys are heavy. Absolutely 100% heavy, and I ended up putting it onto a leather strap in order to really find it wearable. I could have probably done it, but the thing is, the fit wasn't great for me with the relatively little adjustability in here. Coupled with that weight was just like, oof, yikes. So I ended up moving it onto the strap and liked it more that way. But nonetheless, I definitely hope that Model 2 has some more lightning pockets or maybe some material changes to address this. Heck, this watch in full titanium, that would be really compelling. That would be interesting. But as it stands right now, it is a very, very heavy watch. And mind you, there are lots of heavy watches out there. That's a legitimate aesthetic thing something some people can like, but for me, on the bracelet, it was enough to be a deal breaker. So to me, at least, that's what's ugly, is that you have to really like a heavy, overbuilt watch, because that's 100% what this guy is. So on the final conclusion front, honestly, look, I can complain all I like about the weight, but this is a really impressive first watch. This is Serge's very first watch. And that's pretty impressive, because he's done a lot of great things here with a reasonable size, some nice touches on the bracelet, a scratch-resistant finish, a good readability, a solid movement, solid water-resistant, sapphire, swappable bezels, a good price, and a recognizable design that, like I said, is going to win a lot of hearts in the knife world, I think. It's also going to be very polarizing. It's missing a couple of little luxuries. The lume on the hour hand, or on the indices, aren't great. The bezel isn't actually protecting crystal. The watch is very heavy, and honestly, the biggest issue with this guy is it's probably going to get a lot of people into watches, and do not get into watches. Anyways, I digress. For me, personally, I tend to prefer watches on the lighter side, as well as with a little bit more jewelry aesthetic, with a little bit more sparkle, a little bit more polish, a little bit more of that. That to me tends to be, that's kind of where I go. So this isn't a watch that is particularly calling my name. This doesn't speak to me in that sense, but the thing is, I am still duly impressed, because Serge could have come into this and made a bunch of amateur mistakes, and it would have been perfectly reasonable, right? Because it's his first go-around. But no, he's gotten things right. It would have been real easy to skimp on like water resistance and do a plastic crystal or something like that. And especially to, try and get a little bit more profit out of the price point. He could have cut a bunch of corners, but he really didn't. It almost feels, I'm sure he thought long and hard about this guy. And so if this is Model 1, then Model 2 is going to be even better, taking whatever lessons he learns from this and moving forward. I am very, very impressed with this as Serge Watch's very first piece. So all of that said, like I said, for me, not exactly what I'm after, but if you like the aesthetic, you don't mind waiting for the watch, and you don't mind the weight of the watch, then I can see this guy causing a surge of activity on your credit card soon. Okay, anyways, there you go. I hope this is interesting to you, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Don't worry, buying one won't be brain surgery. If you wear this while sewing, you could use a surgeon. Okay, I'll stop. Bye now.